Hey there, welcome to Uncovering Our Hidden History. My name is Anna. I am a genealogist and a historical researcher, and I use my dual superpowers in an attempt to uncover our hidden and falsified history and to find out what they didn't want us to know. And so we have a lot to cover today, and let's get to it. Hey everybody, so happy to see you come back, and I'm thrilled with the amount of positive support and encouragement I'm getting, and I'm just really delighted to see how much so many of you are getting from the information in here. And that's why that's one of the reasons why I did this channel. And so I just enjoy your enthusiasm and the comments. So as I said at the beginning, we have a lot of information to cover today, and I'm just gonna do a disclaimer right now. My voice is still not. I'm only back, at about 80% with the strength of my voice, and so I've got my tea. So there's been just, 3 or 4 people in the comments that it's driving them crazy when I slurp my tea or suck on my lozenge, or I guess apparently in the last video I was smacking my lips a little. So look, this is not Burger King. I don't mean to be flippant, but this is not Burger King. You can't have it your way. I'm, in spite of only being at 80% recovery from the illness I had, I'm showing up. I'm trying to present the information. A lot of you are so hungry for truth, and that's why I'm here. I don't want to wait till I'm completely well. Who knows when that's even going to be. So for those of you who have sensory issues and you're having a hard time, I do apologize. Again, I'm not trying to be flippant here or insensitive, and I will try my best not to smack my lips or slurp my tea, but I can't be so hyper-focused on that my head's not in the game with presenting the information. So if you are just really struggling and you can't take it, then either maybe this isn't the channel for you, or maybe you can find a way to turn the volume down and put your closed captioning on. I don't know. So I want to address this because it is really hard with a normal voice to talk for an hour and a half, let alone one where your voice is going in and out and you don't have a lot of strength in it. So I have my tea, I have my lozenge because I need to keep my throat covered so that I can present this information, and I'm going to do the best I can, but I can't make any promises, so I just want to put that out there. All right, so let's get going. So last week we left off, we covered what a lot of the older researchers had to say about the Native American tribes, and then we covered the North American tribes. So this week, we are covering Mexico and South America, as well as the language structure and how they sound similar to Hebrew words, and some pictures of their physical attributes. What did they look like? So this is part 5 of the Kingdom of Israel and Tartaria in the Americas. Again, these are the main books that I used for the eyewitness accounts. They were actually there interacting with the various tribes and indigenous people, and that makes their words very, very powerful. It makes their testimony very powerful. And so I have these, and then in this go round I do have a couple of sources that are from archive.org, which I will post the links to those in the description. And then I have some clips from a YouTube video, and I made sure to give credit to those people for that, but I will also drop the link to that YouTube video in the description as well. Okay, so Hebrew Israelites in Mexico and Central America. In regards to the similarity of the Native Americans throughout North, Central, and South America, Pastor Ethan Smith, he's the pastor of that church in, I think it was Poultney, Vermont, and he wrote his book in 1825. He says that this information regarding a renowned gentleman by the name of Mr. Baron de Humboldt, who was a celebrated author. The Baron de Humboldt was a native of Germany and a most celebrated character. His works were published in New York in 1811. His travels in New Spain were in the early part of the present century, and relative to our natives having one origin, our author says, the Indians of New Spain bear a general resemblance to those who inhabit Canada, Florida, Peru, and Brazil. They have the same swarthy and copper color, flat and smooth hair, small beards, long eyes with the corner directed upward, and prominent cheekbones. This American race occupies the greatest space on the globe, over 1.5 million of square leagues from the Terra del Fuego Islands to the river St. Lawrence and Bering Strait. We are struck at the first glance with the general resemblance in the features of the inhabitants. We think we perceive that they all descend from the same stock, the same group of people. In the faithful portrait, which an excellent observer, Monsieur Volney, has drawn of the Canada Indians, we undoubtedly recognize the tribes scattered in the meadows of the Rio Apure and the Corona. The same style of features exists, no doubt, in both Americas. This tradition, Dr. Elias Boudinot informed, this tradition is corroborated by a current report among them, related by the old Chickasaw Indians to our traders, that now about 100 years ago there came from Mexico some of the old Chickasaw nation, or as the Spaniards call them, Chichimecas, in quest of their brethren as far north as the Aquapa Nation, or Aquapa Nation. It's hard to know where to put the syllable. Above 150 miles above the Natchez, on the southeast side of the Mississippi River. But through French policy, they were either killed or sent back so as to prevent their opening a brotherly intercourse with them, as they had proposed to do. It is also said that the Nahuatl believed that they dwelt in another region before they settled in Mexico, that their forefathers wandered 80 years in search of it through a strict obedience to the command of the Great Spirit, who ordered them to go in quest of new lands that had such particular marks or signs as were made known to them, and they punctually obeyed the divine mandate, and by that means found out and settled that fertile country of Mexico. Regarding the Mexicans, Pastor Smith stated, we learn in Dr. Robertson's History of America that the Mexicans had their tradition that their ancestors came from a remote country situated to the northwest of Mexico. The Mexicans, he says, point out their various stations as they advanced from this into the interior provinces, and it is precisely the same route which they must have held if they had been immigrants from Asia. Which Asia, that's Tartaria. Quoting an author by the surname of Calmet, who wrote of the Mexicans, he stated, "But the Mexican small colonies, wearied of tyranny, gave themselves republican constitutions. Now it is only after long popular struggles that these free constitutions can be formed. The existence of republics does not indicate a very recent civilization." Here, like a wise politician, he was showing that the Mexicans from ancient date were a civilized people, at least in good degree, and in general, the Indians appear to form 2/5 of the whole population of Mexico. In Guanajuato, Valladolid, Oaxaca, and La Puebla, this population amounts to about 3/5. When the Spaniards conquered Mexico, they found very few inhabitants in the country situated below or beyond the parallel of 20 degrees. Those provinces that were beyond were the abode of the Chichimecs and Olmecs, two pastoral nations of whom thin hordes were scattered over a vast territory. From the 7th to the 13th century, population seems in general to have continually flowed towards the south. The hieroglyphal tables of the Aztecs have transmitted to us the memory of the principal epochs of the great migrations among the Americans. This traveler goes on to speak of those Indian migrations from the north. He adds, "The people, however, who traversed Mexico left behind them traces of cultivation and civilizations. The tall teas appeared first in the year AD 648. The Chichimecs, these being some of the Chickasaw from the North America, in AD 1170, so he's saying that in around AD 1170, the Chickasaw or the Chichimecas showed up in Mexico. And then the Nahualtes in AD 1178, the Acolhues and Aztecs in AD 1196. The noted German author, Monsieur Humboldt, wrote, "Cortez, in his letters to the Emperor Charles V," that would be Charles of Habsburg, "frequently boasts of the industry which the Mexicans displayed in gardening. Their taste for flowers undoubtedly indicates a relish for the beautiful. The European cannot help being struck," our author continues, "with the care and elegance the natives display in distributing the fruits which they sell in small cages of very light wood. The sapotillas, the mamea, pears, and raisins occupy the bottom of the cage, while the top is ornamented with odoriferous flowers. This art of entwining fruits and flowers had its origin perhaps in the happy period when, long before the introduction of inhuman rites, the first inhabitants of Anahuac, like the Peruvians, offered up to the Great Spirit the first fruits of their harvest." And I can't help but think here in Southern California, we border Mexico, and we have so many just very hardworking Mexican people here, and the men especially do gardening and pruning of trees and farming and all kinds of yard work, and they're just so talented at it. So reading that makes me wonder if that is a certain gifting that they were given with plants and with the ground and with the land and growing things. Dr. Boudinot stated regarding the Mexicans, "The Spanish writers also assure us that the Mexicans had a feast and a month, which they called Huitzoltli." I'm sorry I just am going to apologize to all of our Spanish friends, Mexican friends. This is terrible. I do okay sometimes, but not with some of these big words. Hue itzozolti, when the Indian corn was ripe. Every man at that time bringing a handful to be offered at the temple with a kind of drink made out of the same grains. This is no other than the first fruit offering of the northern Indians. George Catlin, an early 19th century explorer and painter, said this: amongst 120 different tribes that I have visited in North, South, and Central America, not a tribe exists that has not related to me distant or vague traditions of such a calamity in which 1 or 3 or 8 persons were saved above the waters on the top of a high mountain. And he, of course, is referring to the Great Flood, the Great Deluge, Noah's flood. Pastor Smith stated, Abi Clavigero assures us that the natives of Mexico had the tradition that once there was a great deluge, and Tepsi, in order to save himself from being drowned, embarked in a ship with his wife and children and many animals, that as the waters abated, he sent out a bird, which remained eating dead bodies. He then sent out a little bird, which returned with a small branch. Mr. Boudinot recorded, the Michoacans, one of the original nations of Mexico, held, according to the Abbe Clavigero's declaration, this tradition, that there once was a great deluge, and Tepsi, as they call Noah, in order to save himself from being drowned, embarked in a ship formed like an ark, with his wife, his children, and many different animals, and several seeds and fruits. As the waters abated, he sent out the bird, which bears the name of Ora, or Ara, which remained eating dead bodies. He then sent out other birds, which did not return, except the little bird called the flower sucker, which brought a small branch with it. From this family of Tepsi, the Michoacans all believed they derived their origin. Both Malvenda and Acosta affirmed that the natives observed a year of Jubilee according to the usage of the Israelites. Okay. And here were some, I couldn't figure out if these drawings were from a book or if they were just plates that were done. If any of you know what the source of this is, please put it in the comments below. Would appreciate that. It says, the most important among the American traditions are the Mexican, for they appear to have been definitively fixed by a symbolic mnemonic paintings before any contact with Europeans. According to these documents, the Noah of the Aztec cataclysm was Coxcox, according to the Aztec. He had saved himself, together with his wife Xochiquetzal, in a bark or raft made of cypress wood. The tradition of the latter is still more strikingly in conformity with the story as we have it in Genesis and in the Chaldean sources. It tells us how Tespi embarked in a spacious vessel with his wife, his children, and several animals and grain, whose preservation was essential to the subsistence of the human race. And sorry, those of you taking screenshots of that, I can see that my animals are missing an L. The Michoacans flood legend says that when the Great Spirit Tezcatlipoca decreed that the water should retire, Tespi sent a vulture from the bark. I think that's supposed to be ark. He sent a vulture from the ark. The bird, feeding on the carcasses with which the earth was laden, did not return. Tespi sent out other birds, of which the hummingbird, so that's that's the flower sucker from the previous slide, so it is a hummingbird, only came back with a leafy branch in its beak. Then Tesby, seeing that the country began to vegetate, left his, bark, like a canoe. Okay, sorry, I was like, had a moment. A canoe, which they carved out of bark. Okay. Then Tesby, seeing that the country began to vegetate, left his bark, his canoe, on the mountain of Colhuacan. Okay. This is very interesting. So I have a little blue arrow pointing to the words. It says Tolteca, Tulan. And you'll understand the Tulan piece in a little bit, but it looks here like these people have captured themselves a giant and disemboweled him. And then it looks like they're trying to drag him away. So interesting. Looks like there were also giants in Mexico. The Zapotecs of southern Mexico held a tradition that said, the flood wiped out the world's first inhabitants, giants, because Creator was angry with them because of their idolatry. A number of persons were able to escape in a boat. They found themselves on top of a hill when the water subsided. And they're absolutely right. This harkens back to Genesis chapter 6, and then also the first book of Enoch. We get more information about the giants and where they came from. The Hopi flood tradition is that the earth was rent in great chasms when Creator sent the flood in his wrath. The Aztec flood tradition states, when the people on earth became wicked, the god of the rain, Tlaloc became angry and made it rain heavily. But Tlaloc saw that there were two good people named Tata and Nena. So he warned Tata and Nena that a great flood was on the way. He told them to make an ark by hollowing out a huge tree trunk, and also that the great flood destroyed the world, and it was the fourth destruction of the worlds. And speaking of that, the Aztec, Hopi, and Navajo believed that 4 worlds had existed before the present world we live in. Those 4 worlds, or suns, had been destroyed by catastrophes, and humankind had been entirely wiped out at the end of each sun or world. The 4th sun, Nahui-Ati, for water, ended in a gigantic flood that lasted 52 years. So isn't that interesting that even the Native American Indigenous tribes all through the Americas speak of, those are basically resets, which we've been kind of hinting to, and we'll get into that more on another video. But according to them, we've had 4 resets, and this is our 5th version of humanity. I find that very interesting, and something that very much was hidden. Diego Duran was much less equivocal in his theorizing, since he said that he had not received a revelation from God, which was the only way to determine for certain where the Indians originated. He would resort to conjecture. He concluded that the Indians must be descended from Jews. His opinion was based on the strange ways and customs and the lowly conversations of the natives, their way of life, ceremonies, rites, and superstitions, omens, and hypocrisies. Also, like the Jews, that the Indians themselves must be Jews. Duran found support for his belief in observations of Indian cultures, which he thought matched very well with the biblical descriptions of the Jews. Unlike Suarez de Peralta, who used the apocryphal book of Esdras IV, which is 2nd Esdras, on which to base his theory, Duran relied on the Bible itself. His source was the second book of Kings, chapter 17, verse 6 and 18. And he is quoting, "In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria, and he carried the Israelites away to Assyria. Therefore, the Lord was very angry with Israel and removed them out of his sight. None was left but the tribe of Judah only." Durand found additional confirmation in the story of Hosea 1:10, that God had promised to multiply the people of Israel like the sands of the sea. Surely, he argued, this promise was fulfilled by the multitudes that the Spanish had found in the New World. Furthermore, he noted, the Indians of Mexico had traditions of a long journey, such as the one from Assyria to Arsareth. So even he's mentioning Arsareth. And this is not anything recent. So very interesting that he's mentioning Arsareth. And this comes from a book called Origins of the American Indians, European Concepts, 1492 to 1729, pages 38 to 39. The only other writer this author found who accepted the Issachar variation of the 10 lost tribes was Baltasar de Medina. In his Crónica de la Santa Provincia de San Diego de Mexico, so of San Diego, which at that point San Diego was part of Mexico, of 1682. Although Medina thought South Americans and people from the Yucatan were descendants of Iacton, of the Gentile father of Ophir, he says, then Mexicans are originally of the 10 tribes captured by Salmanasar and of the family of Issachar, whom the Indians recognize. So he's saying that the indigenous Mexican Indians acknowledge and recognize as their special ancestor Issachar. So they're saying they're from the tribe of Issachar. And again, that's from the same book, Origins of the American Indians, and the author of this was Lee E. Huddleston of the Latin American Studies at the University of Texas. So going to Genesis chapter 46, verse 13, we are told that the sons of Issachar were Tola or Tula, Puva, Yob, and Shimron. And then we're also told in 1 Chronicles 12:32, and of the children of Issachar, which were men that had understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do. The heads of them were 200. So that's interesting. So when I was just doing some Googling on Tola or Tula, because I had seen in some of those other screenshots that I had Tula, and I thought that can't be a coincidence. So here's what I found. It says the Tula site is important. It's an archaeological site. The Tula site is important to the history of Mesoamerica, especially the central highlands of Mexico, but it is generally overshadowed by its predecessor, Teotihuacan, and one of its successors, Tenochtitlan, which I'm going to stop here for a second because I had noticed this, and then I noticed some other people in the comments had picked up on it, that so let's just go back for a second. In the genealogy of both Seth, because remember, Abel was killed from the sons of Adam and Eve, and we had Cain and we had Seth. Both of their lines had an Enoch. And so, right or wrong, how I designate them, because Cain's line went to the dark side and went after everything evil, and just increasingly so, and it seems that his children did as well. So I often will say the good Enoch or the evil Enoch. But the Enoch in Cain's line, we're told he built cities. And so it made me wonder with Titlan, the word Enoch is in there. So it makes me wonder if he somehow found his way over to here, or if some of his descendants did and then named it after him, Titlan. So anyway, just a little something to put in your brain. Just put it on your back burner with a question mark. Anyway, it says the name Tula is derived from the Nahuatl phrase Tolan. Yep, not going there. You guys can see it. Which means near the cattails. However, the Aztecs applied the term Tolan to mean urban center. And it was also used to indicate other sites such as Teotihuacan, Cholula, and Tenochtitlan. The inhabitants of Tula were called Toltecs, but that term was later broadened to mean an urban place artisan or skilled worker. This was due to the high respect in which the indigenous peoples in the Valley of Mexico held the ancient civilization before the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire. And then it just goes on to talk about what remains of that ancient city. But again, let me just string some dots together for you here. If one of the sons of Issachar was Tola or Tula, and then we have the indigenous Mexicans saying that he was their ancestor, and then we have a place in the Central Highlands of Mexico called Tula or Tulan. Those are pretty good indicators to me that they probably are the descendants of Issachar. And this just goes to show the importance of why the tribes, the Hebrew tribes, always carried their oral histories with them. They had to memorize them, and not only for the Israelites as a whole, but for their particular family lines. If you vaguely remember when we were reading from the book of Tobit, Tobit said, I am the son of, and then, he lists his father, grandfather, and all the way back to to Naphtali. And so they keep their oral traditions of their genealogies. All right, this little screenshot came from a book called The Mysteries of the Mexican Pyramids. And these are all, I pulled these from the archive.org version. I do have the books as well, but it was just easier. So I will also give the links to this one and then the other one I'm using in here, so that if you want to go look those up, you can do that. They are very fascinating. In a manuscript, this is from Mysteries of the Mexican Pyramids by Peter Tompkins, and it was published in 1967. In a manuscript written in Quiche in 1554 by several Maya Indians, its Spanish translator, Padre Dionisio Jose Chone, had this to say. It is supposed in the manuscript that the three great Quiche nations mentioned in particular are descendants of the 10 tribes of the Kingdom of Israel, whom Shalmaneser reduced to perpetual captivity and who, finding themselves in the confines of Assyria, decided to emigrate. The actual text ran, "These then were the 3 nations of Quiches, and they came from where the sun rises, descendants of Israel, of the same language and the same customs." In attestation of what they had written, the Indians also signed the document on September 28, 1554, saying, "We have written that which by tradition our ancestors told us, who came from the other part of the sea, from Givan Tulan, bordering on Babylonia." And that was on page 79. Then there are the Negros Mascogos living in Nacimiento, Coahuila, Mexico. And you can see the picture of the stone there. And translated, that says the birth tribe of the black Mascogos and the Seminoles. And Mascogo is someone who is a descendant of the black Seminoles. And this is going to make sense just shortly. So here is a picture of some buildings with murals on them, and you can see that they are most definitely of black persons, of Negro persons in Mexico. So I stumbled across a phenomenal documentary, and the lady in this picture on the bottom is actually one of the presenters, and they did a phenomenal job. And so in the bottom kind of right corner, I put a screenshot of their YouTube, the thumbnail for the YouTube video. As they call themselves the Yarbros, and it says the Black American tribe they tried to hide. And I'm going to link that in the description as well. And I hope that you will watch it, because it's packed with so much information and it's so well done. And you younger ones that love lots of visual graphic and suspense stuff, they've really done a really good job. But they give a pretty thorough history. They interview some of these descendants, and it's very well done. And so I do hope that if this interests you, you'll go check them out and support them. And they've got some other neat things on there too. So their story begins about 1687 to 89 with a group of enslaved black persons from the lowlands of South Carolina, specifically the Gullah people, Gullah. And some of these Gullah had managed to escape south to Spanish Florida. And here's another thing we haven't really been taught. But Florida, so at the time when the colonies were under British rule, Florida was under Spanish jurisdiction. And so there were slaves that were able to escape, some of them, and they were able to make it to Spanish Florida. And the Spanish governor, St. Augustine was specifically the town. And the Spanish governor sheltered these people and refused to turn them over to the slave agents that would show up from time to time to reclaim them. And so news traveled fast, and soon more runaways came to St. Augustine, seeking their freedom and protection from the Spanish governor, a safe haven where they could be free from slavery. And eventually Spain issued a declaration or a proclamation that all of these people, male and female, were to be a free people. And so to the left of that is just a picture of that part of Florida which belonged to Spain. And again, that was while it was still under British rule. Now, during the same time period, there was a Native American tribe called the Creeks, but they were from the Muskogee people, also living in Florida. And because of moral differences within the tribe split into two groups, the Upper Creeks and the Lower Creeks. And the Upper Creeks decided that they were going to go down to Spanish Florida to completely separate from the Lower Creeks who were becoming more and more pro-European and taking on the attributes of the Europeans, including chattel slavery. And so what chattel slavery is basically these lower Creeks were trying to be like the plantation owners and the Europeans, and they were enslaving black people. And the Upper Creeks didn't want anything to do with that. They just morally felt it was wrong, as it was. It was wrong. The whole thing was wrong. And so the Upper Creeks went south into the St. Augustine, Spanish Florida. And so while living in Spanish Florida, the Upper Creeks and the free blacks began to mix and just do life together, having many similarities. I wonder why. Because the Upper Creeks were Hebrews from the 10 lost tribes of Israel, one of them anyway. And then you've got enslaved, runaway blacks who were from the kingdom of Judah. I wonder why they felt community with one another and liked to be with one another. Although they probably had no idea. So they began to mix and do life together, having many similarities. The blacks adopted the Indian clothing of the Creeks and the practices, and the Upper Creeks adopted and learned agricultural skills from the blacks. It was a relationship of mutual respect and reciprocity. And eventually, they merged into one tribe and, started living together as one tribe and became known as the Seminole. And it's believed that the root word of Seminole means runaway, which certainly described both of these groups. So the Seminole Creeks Indians and the Black Seminoles lived together in peace and harmony, thriving in Spanish Florida. Let me see if I can move this over a bit. After the United States took over America from England, from Britain, they launched campaign after campaign to take land that belonged to the Native American tribes. They were especially wary of the free blacks in Florida. Didn't like that. And I'm sure they probably had plantation owners talking and complaining as well. And so they were afraid that it would encourage other slaves to continue to run away. So in the spring of 1818, the U.S., let me pull this back here, in the spring of 1818, the U.S. launched a military campaign against the Seminoles, which again were made up of the Black Seminoles and the Seminole Indians. However, the Seminoles all of them were such fierce warriors. I mean, go back and read the Old Testament, read the scriptures. The Israelites, all of the 12 tribes together, were a force to contend with, especially because they had the Most High on their sides. And they often, when they were in obedience to the Most High and when they were walking in His commandments and doing what they were supposed to, and His favor was on them, they were unbeatable and invincible and struck terror in the heart of the surrounding nations. So that is still going to be, in these descendants. So these Seminoles were fierce warriors, and they held their ground against the U.S. At the end of that first Seminole War, the Spanish ended up selling Florida. I'm sure they were getting pressured. So they ended up selling Florida to the U.S. in exchange for $5 million. This action drove the Seminoles, both the Black and Indians, deeper into central Florida, into the Everglades. Then began the Indian Removal Act from about 1830 to 1850 that enabled the U.S. government under Andrew Jackson to force the but not all, because there were like some of the Cherokee, for example, where the Eastern Band were able to hold on and not go to the reservation, but they did have to give away quite a bit of their land to do that. But and Andrew Jackson ran his presidential campaign. At this point, he's just a general or, high up there. But he ran his whole campaign on getting rid of all the Indians, like exterminating them. So, so the U.S. government launched this military campaign under Andrew Jackson to force the majority of the tribes onto the Trail of Tears and into Oklahoma in order to steal, and yes, they stole, all of that land for the government to sell to subsequent European settlers coming in to settle land in North America. Thomas Jefferson, in his Manifest Destiny protocol, right, and his compatriots were so land hungry. What they couldn't steal by force, they paid big money for, such as what happened with the Louisiana Purchase. So they paid off the Spanish government so they could have Florida. They paid off the French government so they could have the Louisiana Purchase. And then when the Mexican government, who, after they gained their independence from Spain, the Mexican government actually stood up to them and said no. And they ended up having to go to war at that point, and that was the Mexican-American War. And, so, we're told that, the U.S. won that war in 1848, and so then they annexed in, Texas, Oklahoma, Utah, and everything west that had belonged to Mexico. So they either paid big money for it, or they stole it, or they took it by brute force. Because they had to, according to Thomas Jefferson, they had to have it all. And they didn't want to share. Because they could take this land and then parcel it off and sell it to the Europeans coming in and make money. Oh, let me go back. I didn't finish that. Got on my little soapbox there. Then began the Second Seminole War, and at the forefront of the fight were the Black Seminole warriors fighting under their chiefs. So the Black Seminoles had a chief called John Horse, but it said, I guess, that he went by the name Abraham. And then, of course, the Seminole Indians, their chief was Osceola. Okay, so Osceola and John Horse worked together, and they worked all together as one tribe. But the Black Seminoles had way more to lose here, because if the Seminole Indians, for example, were killed, they die, right? But if the Black Seminoles are captured, they're going to be taken back to the plantations, and they might be killed, but they'll be severely punished for running away. So there is a reason that the Black Seminole, under their chief John Horse, fought so hard, because they had a whole lot more to lose in this war. So what were they fighting for? Their freedom. Their freedom to not be sent back to the plantations. This second war, this is so cool, you guys. And again, we didn't hear about this in our school. This second war was a stalemate and cost the U.S. government over $50 million and much loss of life. I'm going to repeat that again. This is why we don't hear about it in our history books, because go read the history. I don't even know how much history books have changed since my day, but it's all about, the conqueror. It's all from the conqueror's view, right? We did this, we did that. The story is always one-sided. and it always favors the elite, the elites, the conquerors, right? So this did not go as they wanted. So they're not gonna publicize this. So the Second War was a stalemate, meaning these Black Seminoles and Seminole Indians fought so hard and were such fierce warriors that they couldn't be beat. And finally, just in exasperation, the U.S. military offered the Black Seminoles emancipation, their freedom, if they would lay down their guns and agree to cease fire, which they did. So here's a picture on the left, just the Seminole Indian chief Osceola, and then on the right is the Black Seminole chief John Horse, aka Abraham. So they all marched on the Trail of Tears along with the various other tribes to Oklahoma. And once they got there, it was not at all advertised like how had been advertised to them. And then once they got there, they were told that the military didn't have the authorization to grant emancipation, and their papers were then null and void, meaning they didn't have papers stating that they were free blacks, which made them targets. And then there were slave catchers that started showing up, sent to Oklahoma to kidnap anyone that had black features or looked, African in any way, and they would just disappear in the night. So, of course, this was very, very alarming to our Seminoles, both Indian and black. And by now, the Seminole Indians have a new chief named Wildcat, because Chief Osceola had died in prison in South Carolina on January 30th, 1838, and he was captured by the U.S. Army in 1837 while trying to negotiate peace. So he was captured, put in prison, and then he died. So the Seminole Indians had a new chief called Wildcat, and then, of course, John Horse was still chief for the Black Seminoles. And I know they have different chiefs, but again, they're all working together as one people and one tribe. So pretty quickly, the Seminole Indian chief Wildcat and John Horse, chief of the Seminoles, made a plan of escape. And the whole tribe, or the majority of them, I don't really know how many, but many of them fled Oklahoma on foot, and they had to walk all the way south to Mexico through Texas. So they went through Oklahoma to Texas, all the way down Texas into Mexico, and crossed into the Mexico border. So Mexico had abolished slavery in 1829, and they welcomed the weary refugees with open arms in 1850. The refugees settled in Coahuila, Mexico, and they named their town Nacimiento, which means birthplace. The Mexican government gave these people land, autonomy, and special rights in exchange for their promise, those fierce warriors, to promise to defend the Mexican border. Because Mexico had a problem. They had Apache and Comanche, which were probably the most vicious of all of those Native Americans to the Southwest. Comanche did not show any quarter whatsoever. They did not show any mercy, and often tortured their, people that they would capture before killing them. They were brutal. And so Mexico had this problem with the Apache and the Comanche raiding across the border, as well as white settlers from the United States trying to cross the border and get into Mexico. So they said, hey, if you will defend the border and keep all of these people out, we will give you land and your autonomy, your freedom, and special rights. Well, they already had freedom there because there was no slavery. So it seemed like a pretty good deal. That's pretty much it. So there's a lot more to the story, but a beautiful, beautiful tale of victory. And because I know, and now you know, who these Seminole Indians were. They were descended from one of the 10 tribes, and you've got these escaped runaway blacks who also got their freedom, and we know they're from the kingdom of Judah. So sitting where we sit today, we can listen to the story, and it's just so wonderful and just amazing. And so I had to tell it. I had to tell it, but I could only tell snippets. So please, I do hope that you'll click on that link in the channel's description and go watch, the whole documentary. Okay. I do need to make a distinction at this point. Not all of the Mexicans in Mexico were Hebrew Israelites. So I need to show you the contrast here. I found this, and it's very interesting. It says the Canaanites also built. So this was an inscription written on pillars of stone in Numidia. And it says, the Canaanites also built a fortress in Numidia. In that place there are 2 pillars made of stone, having Phoenician writing on them, which say in the Phoenician tongue, "We are they who fled from Joshua the robber, the son of Nun." So remember that when the Israelites went in to the land of Canaan, and they then had to fight the various giant tribes, they had to fight against the Canaanites in order to be able to take possession of their inheritance, which the Most High had given to them through Moses. And I also want to make a point here in that from the investigating I've looked into, the Phoenicians never called themselves Phoenicians. They always referred to themselves as Canaanites. So I don't know if they were just a little bit more advanced Canaanites or if it was just that they were seafaring Canaanites, but it was the Greeks that actually called them Phoenicians, and they did not themselves. So my point here being, we had Canaanites that had fled from the land of Canaan. Some of them settled up, near the Mediterranean Sea in the land of Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos. But others, they went everywhere. And they also came into the Americas. Now, here is the other book I have mentioned. It's called Mysteries of the Past by Lionel Casson, and he published this in 1977. And in the bottom, I have a picture of Phoenician or Canaanite Phoenician sailors. But what Mr. Casson says here is, he says, with such impeccable nautical references, it was inevitable that the Phoenicians sooner or later would qualify as early transatlantic voyagers. One of their champions, writing in 1822, claimed that he knew of a manuscript. It was no longer available for consultation, of course, but it had been drawn up by a Phoenician named Votan, which is also Votan, so Wotan or Votan, same being, who told how he saw the Tower of Babel being built, and how he came to the New World when forced out of his home by the Israelites. Another writing a few decades later proved that the Maya were descended from the inhabitants of Tyre, who transferred to America when their city was besieged and taken by Alexander the Great. So this is a big distinction. The Maya, we are being told, are descendants of the Canaanites. And then if we look at their barbaric ceremonial practices of their altars, where they sacrifice, babies and humans, and they rip the hearts out of, living, whoever got chosen to be the sacrifice for whatever ceremony, they would rip the beating heart out of the person. So I think that's a pretty good indicator that that is not a practice the Hebrews would have partaken of, or the especially from the tribe of Issachar, the indigenous Mexicans there. But these Maya are being linked to the ancient Canaanites, and we can see that in their ceremonial practices. So again, let me read that again. It says, the Maya were descended from the inhabitants of Tyre, who came to America when their city was besieged and taken by Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great came in and destroyed the city of Tyre. And then, some years ago, Cyrus Gordon, a recognized authority on Semitic languages and an impassioned believer in pre-Columbian voyages to America, announced in the New York Times his discovery of proof positive that a group of Phoenicians had landed in Brazil. His information came from someone who had bought a scrapbook for just a few pennies at some kind of benefit sale and found in it a letter written in 1874 by the head of Rio de Janeiro's museum, which included a copy of a transcription of a stone inscribed in Phoenician characters. The inscription conveniently supplied all of the details one could possibly desire: the exact identity of the party that had erected the stone. It says a commercial venture from Sidon, which was right up there near Tyre. The date, it was done in the 19th year of Hiram, king of Tyre, and he said that would have been about 534 BC. And then the point of departure had been from Ezion-Geber, just like Solomon's expeditions to Ophir. So if you will go back and read in both Kings and Chronicles, you'll see that the Canaanites from Tyre supplied King Solomon. They floated cedar trees from Lebanon down, what we call Lebanon, today Lebanon, anciently was Tyre. And he floated the cedar trees down to Solomon, and then he also sent artisans and woodworkers and masons and all of that to help Solomon build the temple of the Most High, because he didn't know how to do it. And they also helped him build his own palace. And it says that it took them 7 years to build the temple of the Most High, and then Solomon spent 13 years on his own palace, and it was even more grand. And so during this whole process, there was a relationship, a friendship that developed between Solomon and Hiram, the king of Tyre. And yeah, so that's a little backstory for you. And they would go on sailing. They would each send their sailors, which would go on sailing ships to a land called Ophir, So there's been much debate as to where Ophir is, but for gold. And it's believed that quite a few people believe that Ophir is either Central or South America, where they were picking up the gold. Okay, now in the Mysteries of the Mexican Pyramids, and this is back to Peter Tompkins, on his book on pages 78 and 79, sorry, I'm going to have to lean in because it's teeny. He says that Ordonez claimed to have gotten the material for his story from a book written by Votan himself in the Quiche language, asserting that the original book had been burned by Núñez de la Vega, Bishop of Chiapas, in 1691, who before destroying it had copied parts of it which he showed to Ordonez. Votan was said to have set out from the land of Shivim, not specifically identified but believed to be transatlantic, he says, and to have come to the Yucatan via the dwelling of the 13, which he's identifying as the Canary Islands, with a stopover on a large Caribbean island presumed to either be Hispaniola or Cuba, but more likely the former. And from there, Votan is said to have crossed to the east coast of Mexico, where he made his way up the Usumacinta River to found the city now known as Palenque. Votan is described as having arrived with a retinue dressed in long robes, of having exchanged ideas and customs with the natives, who submitted to his rule and who gave to the strangers their daughters in marriage. Bishop Núñez de la Vega also quoted Votan's book in a publication of his own entitled Constituciones Dionysianos de Chiapas. And according to Núñez de la Vega, when Votan came to America, he listed the names of all the provinces and cities in the area in which he tarried. One was known as Huehueta, where Votan is claimed to have placed a treasure in a damp, dark, subterranean house, appointing a woman as chieftain of the treasure, with keepers to guard her. Núñez de la Vega says that as bishop, he carefully inspected the whole province to identify the locality where the treasure had been buried, and when he found it, ordered its guardians to surrender what turned out to be nothing more than several lidded clay jars, green stones, and manuscripts. These the bishop publicly burned in the marketplace along with Votan's manuscripts. 4 times Votan is said to have returned to his former home across the Atlantic, known as Valum Shivum, which Ordonez eventually identified as the city of Tripoli in Phoenicia. After one of these return voyages, Votan is described as having come to a great city where a magnificent temple was under construction, which is intended to reach heaven, but it was doomed by a confusion of languages. And in his Constituciones, Núñez de la Vega was even more specific, saying that what Votan saw was the Great Wall of the Tower of Babel. In another manuscript, Votan's arrival is dated at 1000 BC, which led modern scholars to suggest that Votan and his men in robes could have been Phoenicians. Constance Irwin, in her book Fair Gods and Stone Faces, agrees that Votan and his followers could well have been Phoenicians, but places the date sometime later. She says the great city which Votan could have visited for trade might have been Babylon, the greater city in the Middle East, a favorite market for Phoenician merchants, where stood the magnificent Tower of Babel, rebuilt by Nobloplacer and his successor Nebuchadnezzar in the 7th and 6th centuries BC. After his death, Votan was associated with jade and snakes. So he went on to either be a part of or to found a serpent cult. Okay, so this next one again is from Mysteries of the Mexican Pyramids, pages 82. And then you can see on the right, there are some sketches of, I'm not sure if that is Votan or if it's just the Maya in general, which are descendants. And it says, Cabrera says one of somebody named Castañeda's drawings represents Votan, or a Hivite from Tripoli in Phoenicia. So on the other page we read, they said Shivite, Chivite. So I believe that is the same thing as the Hivites. So they're saying that on this picture to the right, that the drawing represents Votan or a Hivite, some Hivite from Tripoli in Phoenicia. He says Votan was called a culebra or snake and later was placed among the gods. Cabrera adds that Amaguamecan was in the province of Chiapas, where the Indians carefully preserved the remembrances of their origin and of their ancestors' early progress from the voluntary or enforced abandonment of Palestine on the ingress of the Hebrews. So basically what they're saying here is that these Mayan, or these people of Chiapa, who they're also being called Indians, they had carefully preserved the remembrances of their origin, and which told of being forcibly removed from Palestine, from Canaan, because of the Hebrew Israelites driving them out. So that's what this is saying. Votan is said to have declared himself a snake, descendant of Emos of the line of Can, which I think is Cam. So he's on, obviously we know the Canaanites were descendants of Cam. And he said that he came to America from a distant place by the command of God, one of the gods. According to Manly P. Hall, Votan founded Palenque, built a temple with many subterranean chambers called the House of Darkness, and there deposited the records of his nation. Okay, sorry, I had to put in a throat lozenge because I can feel my voice starting to go. I'll try not to make slurpy noises. Okay. So in addition to Canaanites, Phoenicians, and Votan, oh my, we also have the Olmec. And they have been such an enigma with their big heads all over Mexico. No one really knows where they came from because they don't look like the Maya or the Aztecs. So I found this very interesting. Regarding the Olmec, there is another plausible explanation for their arrival in Mexico. Antiquities researcher and author Jason Brashear of archaics.com stated the following, and this was in his Phoenix Resets, where he did a video where he was talking. He had gathered information from all over the world of ancient peoples recording these resets, these, blood falling from the sky, red rains falling from the sky. And so he has been able to write down and list the dates of some of those. So he says in 1135 BC, he said there was a cataclysm in China which caused the Shang dynasty to collapse. and 250,000 Chinese escaped in ships and reappeared as the Olmec civilization in Central America. So now I want you to think for a minute, take your mind back for a minute to Tartaria, to Eastern Tartaria. We had China right there, just south of Arsareth, southeast of Arsareth. You had China there. And so we had those straits of Anian, and we know that America was right on the other side because that's where our Hebrew Israelites crossed. But if these people from the Shang dynasty had boats, there's no reason they couldn't have gone down the straits, and they easily could have landed in Mexico. And they wouldn't have had to travel very far to do that. So I don't know. I think that there might be something to this. It definitely makes more sense than nobody's really bringing anything else to the table with this. And if you look at these various pictures, I just did Google, research on the Olmec. And I found a side profile of the big head, which is down in the right corner. And if you kind of look at it from the side, it does kind of, all of these look Asian. A lot of the images here look Asian, and so I think I'm putting my hat in the ring with Jason of Archaics that this makes a lot of sense, and it was very close for them to just get in boats and sail down the Anian Straits, and they could have easily landed in Central America. So I thought I would just put that out there for you guys. And then we have this other strange phenomenon. We got Egyptians in the Grand Canyon. I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but an incredible story was published by the Arizona Gazette in 1909 that reported about an archeological expedition in the center of the Grand Canyon, Arizona, funded by the Smithsonian Institute. Of course it was. And in the expedition, the explorer G.E. Kincaid claimed to have discovered an underground citadel during a boat trip from Green River, Wyoming, down the Colorado River. The archaeologists of the Smithsonian Institute made conclusive proof that the civilization that had inhabited this mysterious cave was possibly from Egypt. Explorer Kincaid is said to have been traveling alone in a wooden boat down the Colorado River in search of minerals such as gold. He noticed stains in the sedimentary formations on the eastern side of the canyon where he was sailing, around 40 miles up the river from the El Tovar Crystal Canyon. He had difficulty finding the trail, but finally reached there. Kincaid stated that above a shelf there was the entrance to the cave by walking along steps. He went about 100 feet inside the cave and found a crypt where he claimed to have discovered mummies. He used his flashlight to photograph one of them. He also saw hallways, rooms, copper objects, and various other artifacts, along with what appeared to him at the time to be hieroglyphs of an Egyptian or Oriental type. Kincaid also reported the discovery of mummies in one of the largest chambers, a crypt which he purportedly photographed. The walls slanted back at 35 degrees, with mummies occupying separate shelves. Well, do we know of, there's not too many people groups that mummify their dead, so there's another thing to consider. And it looks like they are, they're mummified and standing. So that's very interesting. At the head of each was a small bench with copper cups and pieces of broken swords. The mummies were all covered in a bark-type fabric and some with clay. On the lower tiers were urns ranging in design from plain to fine, and there were no female or child burials here, which led Kincaid to believe that this exterior section was the warriors' barracks. And then there is also John Wesley Powell's journal from 1869, to whom credit is unduly given for his exploration of the Grand Canyon via the Colorado River. It reports his archaeological discoveries before Kincaid. So he did this before this Kincaid fellow, and his accounts are similar. And in his journal, he says, "In this canyon, great numbers of man-made caves are hollowed out. I first walked down a gorge to the left of a cliff and climbed to a bench of the cliff. There was a trail on the cliff bench that was deeply worn into the rock formation. Where the trail crossed some gulches, some steps had been cut. I could see no evidence that the trail had been traveled in a long time. I returned to our camp about 3 p.m., and the men had found more Egyptian hieroglyphs on cliff walls near the cave. We explored the cave and found this shrine and other artifacts. That evening, I sent a team member to notify the Smithsonian Institute of our discovery. We continued to survey the canyon and discovered more Egyptian tunnel cities. I estimate in my report that upwards of 50,000 Egyptians had inhabited the Grand Canyon at one time." And I didn't put it in here, but when I was, just doing some searching, there are several, I guess what they call towers. And so there's like an Isis tower or an Isis wall, and there's the Tower of Set and the Tower of Horus. So there definitely was an Egyptian presence there, and which then your mind has to go, how did they get here? And how did they get 50,000 of their people here? And when did they do this? I mean, just a lot of strange stuff in the Americas. A lot of strange stuff. Okay, now this isn't specifically in Central America or South America, but it's around the area. But I think this group of people, I kind of stumbled upon this accidentally when I was looking for something else. And I think y'all are the kind of people that will enjoy these stories because they're bizarre. The following comes from the accounts of the voyage. So this is, by the way, this is from the book America, being the latest and most accurate description of the New World, written by John Ogilvie in the 1600s. And he says the following comes from the accounts of the voyage of Americus Vespucius to the Canary Islands. The next remark in this voyage was that the discovery of an island not far from the former, where he found the footsteps of a gigantic people, upon which 9 Spaniards went a league to search the country, where they saw 5 great huts standing in a spacious valley. And in them were 2 old and 3 young women, each of them being twice as tall as an ordinary man. Now, I want you to think about that for a minute. These are women. Women tend to be a little bit shorter than men, right? These women were twice as tall as an ordinary man. So let's just say that, maybe these Spaniards might have been 5 feet. I think they're taller than that because they're European. But let's just say 5 feet. Well, if you double 5 feet, at a minimum, these women were 10 feet. And then if you go all the way up to, let's say they were 6 feet tall, double that is 12. So these women were somewhere between 10 to 12 feet tall. And it says the old ones invited the Spaniards to eat, who, when they were sat down, consulted how they might take and carry one of these giantesses to Spain, there to show her for money. Of course, stand up, guys. Let's go to somebody else's land and kidnap the people. And they did this a lot, by the way. If you read a lot of that book, they were always doing this. Whenever they found some kind of oddity or something that people didn't see, they would kidnap, either find a way to get it onto their boats or kidnap them or attempt to kidnap so they could take them back and show them, make people pay money to see them. Really bad. So then as they were having this conversation about how to kidnap one of them, 36 giants came in to the room, which so amazed the Spaniards that their hair seemed to stand and end at the fear thereof. Every giant was armed with a bow and arrows and a club. They, wondering at the 9 strangers, stood talking very earnestly one to another, which gave the Spaniards time to think of making their escape. Some judged it convenient to discharge their guns upon them, and then in the smoke to run away. Others thought it would be better to take a milder course, which they all agreed on. And taking their leave, they went out of the hut, but were followed by the giants, the men, who kept a stone's cast behind them, and went faster or slower as the Spaniards slackened or mended their pace, who at last, getting to the shore, and from there onto their boats, they suddenly put off. But the giants then pursued them with eager speed, all of them leaping into the water and swimming, shot abundance of arrows after them, but frightened by the thunder of the 2 great guns that were discharged from the ships, returned ashore and fled into the neighboring hills. So we don't know what particular island this was on, but it's around the Canary Islands, which there seems to be a lot of interesting things and mystery about the Canary Islands. The next following account comes from another voyage of Americus Vespucius, and he was sent out to discover new countries between the Canary Islands and Africa. From thence, 5 degrees southward of the equinox, he found a naked people on the top of a high rock that beckoned the Spaniards to come towards them, upon which 2 of them, of the men, the 2 of the Spanish men, resolved to venture thither, which means there, having been ordered not to stay at the most above 5 days. The first encounter they had, these 2 men, was of some women who offered their bodies to prostitution. But a youth, as if affrighted with some sudden danger, came running amongst them, whom whilst they stood gazing upon and wondering at the Spaniards, an old woman with a great club running down the hill overtook and knocked the youth down dead upon the ground, which done, the women that were making court to the Spaniards took him by the heels and dragged him up the hill, where soon after they saw him chopped in pieces, broiled, and eaten. They also made signs to the Spaniards that they would devour them also in the same manner. The shore was crowded with men, which showered upon them several flights of arrows, whereof they thought it best to weigh anchor. So taking aboard their 2 men, and having sailed 150 leagues, which is about 518 miles, they got sight of the coast of Brazil. So they're somewhere near close to Brazil. Now, Vespucius's 4th expedition happened on May 10th, anno 1503, in the year 1503, at which time he steered directly with 6 sails to Sierra Leona, which I think is the same as Sierra de Leone, and approaching the coast, could not come to an anchor because of the strong eddying currents. 3 degrees beyond the equinox appeared a rising island, 2 leagues, which is 7 miles long, and 1 broad, destitute of inhabitants. His best ship, being 600 tons, split here against a rock, and nothing of her was saved but the seamen. But Vespucius, rowing ashore with a boat, found a convenient haven with abundance of sweet water, high trees, sea spiders, and horrible dragons, which have a sharp head, round fiery eyes, and wide mouths, and wings not unlike a bat, a speckled breast, curled tail, a blue back. I think that is supposed to be blue as in BLUE. That was the old English. A blue back and 2 bags, like a drawn satchel, triangular, were under their bellies. No less strange are the sea spiders by their hard feet, long upper teeth, 2 long shears or pincers, and double belly. Between the head and the belly lies a black skin, which with they darken the water. When anyone goes to take them in the night, they make a great shadow. Kind of sounds like a squid. Kind of sounds like a squid or an octopus. It says they feed on fish. The female lays little white eggs, not unlike ordinary hailstones. So, and then the picture I put there, actually, I took a screenshot and it came from the book. So, again, I put these out here to say it's like our version of humanity, since maybe our great-grandparents or our great-great-grandparents' time, is been like completely sanitized and scrubbed. We look at, all of the Greek marble statues and things, and we're told, oh, that's just mythology. The Greeks, have a great imagination. No, that's not real. That's mythology. You find something. No, it's just a fable. Like, we are so taught to not look at anything, and then our academic people, our academia, our institutions will come up with some kind of explanation for it, or they'll make fun of you, if you want to question these things or you find these things. And so there's just something really wrong. Like, this is, everybody in this time frame would have, been reading this book. So why is all of this hidden from us? I guess is what I'm really trying to ask and figure out. Why did they hide all of this? Okay, moving on. We're now going to get into the Hebrew Israelites in South America. So before we move on, hopefully you understood who the Hebrews were in Mexico that identified themselves from the tribe of Issachar. But then you also had other, people there, like the Mayans, who were Canaanites. And I'm not exactly sure about the Aztecs, to be honest with you. My hypothesis is that they would be maybe a remnant left of the Maya that intermixed with the Mexicans, but I don't know. So that's my hypothesis. I need to do a lot more digging and investigating into the Aztecs, but they almost seem to be an amalgamation of different peoples. All right, so let's see what's going on in South America. Dr. Elias Boudinot wrote the following account. Acosta says that the Peruvians held a very extraordinary feast called Itu, which they prepared themselves for by fasting 2 days, not accompanying with their wives, or eating sail meat or garlic, or drinking chica during that period. They had that they assembled together in one place and did not allow any stranger or beast to approach them, that they had clothes and ornaments which they wore only at that great festival, that they went silently and sedately in procession with their heads veiled and drums beating, and that this continued one day and night. But the next day they danced and feasted, and for 2 days successively their prayers and praises were heard. This appears to be no other than like our northern Indians' great festival to atone for sin according to the Mosaic system. According to Dr. Boudinot, who was quoting explorer Emmanuel de Moraes, he says, Emmanuel de Moraes, a Portuguese historian, in his History of Brazil says, America has been wholly peopled by the Carthaginians and Israelites. As to the last, he says nothing but circumcision is wanted to constitute a perfect resemblance between them and the Brazilians, and we have seen that some of the nations practiced it to this day. Pastor Ethan Smith wrote, Don Antonio de Ulloa, quoted by Dr. Williams, had a great acquaintance with the Indians of South America and some parts of North America. Speaking of the Indians of Cape Breton, in the latter, he declared them to be the same people with the Indians in Peru. If we have seen one American, said he, we may be said to have seen them all. These remarks do not apply to all of the people in the northern extremities of America. The Eskimo, or the Esquimaux, which is Inuit, natives appear to be a different race of men. This race are found in Labrador and Greenland and round Hudson's Bay. All these people appear evidently the same with the Laplanders, Zemblins, Samoyeds, and the northeastern Tartars, meaning the Tungusic Siberians. These probably migrated to this western hemisphere at periods subsequent to the migration of the Indians, but the consideration of those different people does not affect our subject at hand. Quoting from Don Alonso de Aricia in his History of Chile, Pastor Smith said, Let us look at the natives in an extreme part of South America and see if they exhibit any evidence similar to what has been adduced of the natives of North America. Don Alonso de Aricia says of the natives there, the religious system of the Araucanians is simple. They acknowledge a supreme being, the author of all things, whom they call Pilan, a word derived from Puli or Pili, which means the soul, and it signifies the supreme essence. They call him also Guenopilan, the spirit of heaven. This author says of this people, they all agreed in the belief of the immortality of the soul. This consolatory truth is deeply rooted and in a manner innate with them. They hold that man is composed of two substances essentially different, the corruptible body and the soul, which is incorporeal and eternal. He says of those native Chileans, many suppose that they are indigenous to the country, while others suppose they derive their origin from a foreign stock, and at one time they say that their ancestors came from the north and at other times from the west. In his book, Christopher Columbus and the Participation of the Jews in the Spanish and Portuguese Discoveries, author Meyer Kaeserling, translated by Charles Gross, wrote, To what race did these aborigines of America belong? Several writers have asserted and have displayed much learning in attempting to prove that the aborigines were descendants of the Jews, Hebrews. This result was reached already in the 16th century. So 16th century would have been the 1500s. So it was already reached in the 16th century by the Spanish clergyman Roldan. His arguments were derived from an unpublished manuscript which he discovered at the library of San Pablo in Seville. Montesinos, who possessed the manuscripts of Luis Lopez, the learned bishop of Quito, was convinced that the Peruvians were of Jewish origin. The view of Roldan and of Gregorio Garcia that the Aborigines of America were descendants of the Jews, and by this we mean the Hebrews, okay? Because these people don't know the difference like we do now. It was maintained with many arguments in one and the same year of 1650, independently by the Englishman Thorogood and by the Portuguese Jew Manasseh ben Israel, a renowned rabbi of Amsterdam, who induced Cromwell to allow the Jews to return to England. A Portuguese Marano of Villaflor, who, strange to say, also called himself Montesinos, after the Dominican friar Antonio Montesinos, and then afterwards assumed the name Aaron Levi, informed Manasseh ben Israel, so that the Ben there means son of, so this man is calling himself Manasseh, son of Israel, that he had mingled in South America with Jews of the 10 tribes. Manasseh's book, The Hope of Israel, attracted much attention and was translated into Latin, Spanish, Dutch, English, Italian, and Hebrew. Nor has interest in it ceased even to the present day. It is not improbable that the Hebrews, who were driven from Nineveh by Salmanasar, wandered into uninhabited regions. And according to Herrera, the Indians cherished the tradition that Yucatan had been settled by tribes from the Orient, likely, and I put in parentheses, likely Tartaria, since that is where the majority of the Israelite tribes had settled. Several writers give the exact route by which the Hebrews traveled until they settled in Cuba. Lord Kingsborough even asserts that they crossed Bering Straits and then proceeded to Mexico and Peru. Okay. Again, from Mysteries of the Past by Lionel Casson. On page 11, he says, before long, Antonio's tale, Montesino, what we just read about, Antonio's tale of Israelites who had wandered to America was escalated into a theory which put them among the founders of the New World civilization, a theory that reached its heyday in the 19th century. Britain's Lord Kingsborough, for example, went through the family fortune and landed in debtor's prison no less than 3 times, and he died there the last time, in order to publish a deluxe superbly illustrated volumes proving that the Mexican Indians were in fact descendants of the lost tribes. Okay, so because I kept encountering this Antonio Montesinos and Manasseh ben Israel in this book that was written, The Hope of Israel, I got onto archive.org. In case you can't tell, I love that repository. And I was able to find the digital, the scanned-in version of that book. And so just to kind of lay the groundwork a little bit, this Manasseh, son of Israel, is a rabbi. He's a Portuguese rabbi. So we're going to cover the Portuguese and the Sephardic Jews more in detail when we do the next series on the kingdom of Judah. But just in a nutshell, there was thousands of Judeans in the kingdom of Judah that were taken as slaves to Sephar. And Sephar is the ancient name for Spain. Okay, that's why they're called the Sephardic Jews. And then Portugal, I still am not quite clear on how Portugal came to be, but we had then a lot of Judeans that they're called the Black Jews, but Judeans that also went into Portugal. Okay, so this Rabbi Manasseh ben Israel is a Portuguese rabbi, and not exactly sure what the story is there. I'd have to do more, or you guys too, not just me, you guys too, figure out what was going on that brought a lot of these Portuguese Judeans, right, from the tribe of Judah. They're Judeans, they're not Jews, brought them to Amsterdam. So Amsterdam is in Holland, and so there's, by the time of this book, you've got this whole enclave of Hebrew, Judeans in Amsterdam. And it might have something to do with the Spanish Inquisition and all of that was going on in Spain, and then maybe even Portugal as well. So that's kind of the backdrop of that. And then, so this Antonio Montesinos is also a Portuguese Jew. And so he tells the story to Manasseh ben Israel, who writes this book. He tells his testimony of what happened to him in South America. And so then Manasseh ben Israel writes this book called The Hope of Israel. And rather than just keep alluding to it, let's actually read it. Let's read Antonio Montesinos' actual words. Now, there's quite a bit more to it, but I just wanted the specific this specific encounter. In the 18th month of Elul, which is the 5404 year Anno Mundi, so the Jews, the Hebrews, they count from the beginning of the world, right? So Anno Mundi is the year of the world. They don't do the AD BC thing that the Jesuits put us on and the Romans put us on. So he is saying in the 18th month of Elul, the 5404th year, Anno Mundi, from the world's creation, and according to the to common compute, which would equal 1644 AD, Aaron Levi, otherwise called Antonius Montesinos, came into this city of Amsterdam and related to the Senor Manasseh ben Israel and other chieftains of the Portugal nation, inhabitants of the same city, these things which follow. That it was 2 years and a half since that he, going from the port of Honda, which is located in Colombia in the West Indies, to the Papian jurisdiction, he conducted some mules of a certain Indian whose name was Franciscus Castellanos, into the province of Quito, which is in Ecuador, and that there was one in their company with him and the other Indians whose name was Francis, who was called by all Caziques. That it happened that as they went over the mountains, Cordillera, which is, and I put in brackets, it's the mountain range that goes through Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Panama, and then becomes the Andes once in Peru. So it says that once that they had gone over the mountains, Cordillera, a great tempest arose which threw the laden mules to the ground. The Indians being afflicted by the sore tempest, every one began to count his losses, yet confessing that all that and more grievous punishments were but just in regard of their many sins. But Francis had them take it patiently, for that they should shortly enjoy rest. And I'm just going to mention here, I just basically transcribed this directly from this document, which is written in Old English. So if you see some things spelled a little wonky, it's not that I don't know how to spell. I'm trying to write it out as it was in the document, with the exception of if it was spelled so badly that, we wouldn't be able to read it. I did correct that. But so no, this isn't just me not knowing how to spell. This is how it's written. So, but Francis had them take it patiently, for that they should shortly enjoy rest. The others answered that they were unworthy of it, yea, that the notorious cruelty used by the Spaniards towards them was sent of God, because they had so ill-treated his holy people, who were of all others the most innocent. Now then, they determined to stay all night upon the top of the Cordillera Mountains, and Montesinos took out a box of some bread and cheese and yonkers and gave them to Francis, upbraiding him that he had spoken disgracefully of the Spaniards. Francis, who answered that he had not told even one half of the miseries and calamities inflicted by that cruel and inhumane people, but that they should not go unrevenged, looking for help from an unknown people. After this conference, Montesinos went to Carthagena, a Canaanite city, where he, being examined, was put in prison. And while he prayed to God, these were the words that fell from him. Blessed be the name of the Lord, that hath not made me an idolater, a barbarian, a blackamoor, or an Indian. But as he said Indian, he was angry with himself and said, the Hebrews are Indians. Then he, coming to himself, again added, can the Hebrews be Indians? Which he also repeated a second and a third time. And he thought that it was not by chance that he had so much mistaken himself. He, thinking farther of what he had heard from the Indian Francis, and hoping that he should find out the whole truth, therefore, as soon as he was let out of prison, he sought out Franciscus, believing that he would repeat to him again what he had spoken. He therefore, being set at liberty through God's mercy, went to the Port Honda, and according to his desire, found him, I think Franciscus, who said that he remembered all that he had spoken when he was upon the mountain. And Montesinos then asked that he would take a journey with him, offering him all courtesies, giving him 3 pieces of something. I'm assuming it's going to be money, but it was unreadable due to an ink blot. So he offered him 3 pieces of something that he might buy himself necessaries. Now when they were got out of the city, Montesinos confessed himself to be a Hebrew of the tribe of Levi, and that the Lord was his God. And he told the Indian that all other gods were but mockers, and the Indian, being amazed, asked him the name of his parents. Montesinos answered, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. After that, both had sat down together and refreshed themselves, and the Indian thus began. If you have a mind to follow me, your leader, you shall know whatever you desire to know. Only let me tell you this. Whatever the journey is, you must foot it, meaning you have to walk. And you must eat nothing but parched maize, which is corn. And you must omit nothing that I tell you. Montesinos answered that he would do all. The next day, being Monday, Cosicus came again and bid him to throw away what he had in his knapsack, to put on shoes made of linen pack thread, and to follow him with a staff. Whereupon Montesinos, leaving his cloak and his sword and other things which he had about him, they began the journey. They, being thus accoutred, traveled the whole week, unto the Sabbath day, on which day they rested. The day after they went on, till Tuesday, on which day at about 8 o'clock in the morning, they came to a river as big as Duras. Then the Indian said, Here you shall see your brethren. and making a sign with the fine linen of Xylus, which they had about them instead of a girdle. Thereupon on the other side of the river they saw a great smoke, and immediately after such another sign made as they had made before. A little after that, 3 men with a woman in a little boat came to them, which being come near, the woman went ashore, and the rest stayed in the boat, and who talking a good while with the Indian, kasiki, in a language which Montesinos understood not, she returned to the boat and told the 3 men what she had learned from the Indian, who always eyeing him came presently out of the boat, and embraced Montesinos. The woman, after their example, doing the like, after which one of them went back to the boat, and when the Indian bowed down to the feet of the other 2, so I'm assuming that when kasiki bowed down to the feet of the other 2 and to the woman, they embraced him courteously and talked a good while with him. After that, the Indian bid Montesinos to be of good courage and to not look, that they should come a second time to him until he had fully learned the things that which were to be told to him at the first time. Then those 2 men coming on each side of Montesinos, they spoke in Hebrew the 4th verse of Deuteronomy 6. Shema Israel Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. That is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one God. And then the Indian interpreter, being asked how it was in Spanish, they spoke what follows to Montesinos, making a short pause between every particular. 1. Our fathers are Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Israel. And they signified these by the 3 fingers lifted up, and then they joined Reuben, adding another finger to the former 3. So they're designated that they're of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob of the tribe of Reuben. Number 2, we will bestow several places on them who have a mind to live with us. 3, Joseph dwells in the midst of the sea. They making a sign by 2 fingers put together and then parted them, most likely signifying the splitting of Joseph into the 2 tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. 4. They said, speaking fast, Shortly some of us will go forth to see and to tread underfoot. At which word they winked and stamped with their feet. 5. One day we shall all of us talk together, they saying, Ba, 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 and we shall come forth as issuing out of our mother the earth. 6. A certain messenger shall go forth. 7. Franciscus shall tell you somewhat more of these things, they making a sign with their finger that much must not be spoken. 8. Suffer us that we may prepare ourselves, and they turning their hands and faces every way, thus pray to God. Do not stay long. I'm not sure what that means. 9. Send 12 men, they making a sign that they would like men that have beards and who are skillful in writing to come to them. The conference being ended, which lasted a whole day, the same men returned on Wednesday and Thursday and spake the same things again without adding a word. You must observe that all of those 3 days the boat stayed not in the same place, but when those 4 who came and went away, other 4 came, who all as with one mouth repeated all of the former mentioned 9 particulars as stated above, and there came and went altogether 300. So 300 of the tribe of Reuben. Those men are somewhat scorched by the sun, some of them comely of body, well accoutred, having ornaments on their feet and legs, and their heads were compassed about with a linen cloth. Montesinos saith that when he was about to be gone on Thursday evening, they showed him very much courtesy and brought him whatever they thought fit for his journey. And they said that they themselves were well provided with all such things, which the Spaniards in India, or the West Indies, call their own. The same day, Montesinos said to the Indian, Kasiki, "You remember, Francis, that my brethren told me that you should tell me something. Therefore I entreat you that you would not think much to relate it." The Indian answered, "I will tell you what I know, only do not trouble me, and you shall know the truth, as I have received it from my forefathers. Attend therefore to what I shall tell you. Thy brethren are the sons of Israel, and brought thither by the providence of God, who for their sake wrought many miracles, which you will not believe if I should tell you what I have even learned from my fathers. We Indians made war upon them in that place, and we used them more hardy than we are now being used by the Spaniards. Then by the instigation of our magicians, whom we call montesinos, we went armed to that place where you saw your brethren, with an intent to destroy them. But not one of all of those who went thither came back again. Whereupon we then raised a great army and set upon them, but with the same success, for again none escaped," meaning their people. Every time they sent people over to make war or to destroy the Israelites, no one came back. Which happened also the third time, so that the West Indies, so that he calls it India, but they're in the West Indies, was almost bereft of all inhabitants except for old men and women. The old men and the rest who survived, believing that the magicians used false dealings, consulted to destroy them all, and many of them being killed, those who remained promised to discover somewhat that which was not known. Upon that they desisted from cruelty, and they declared such things as follows: that the God of those children of Israel is the true God, and that all that which is engraven upon their stones is true, that about the end of the world they shall be the lords of the world, that some shall come who shall bring you much good, and after that they have enriched the earth with all good things. Those children of Israel going forth out of their country shall subdue the whole world to them, as it was subject to them formerly. So all this will happen right before the end, or before the end happens. You shall be happy if you make a league with them. Then 5 of the chief Indians, whom they call kasiki, who were my ancestors, having understood the prophecies of the magicians, which they had learned of the wise men of the Hebrews, went there, and after much entreaty obtained their desire, having first made known their mind to that woman whom you saw to be an interpreter, for your brethren will have no commerce with our Indians. And whosoever of their Indians, do enter the country of your brethren, they presently kill him. And none of your brethren does pass into our country. Now by the help of that woman, we made this agreement with them, that number 1, our 5 kasiki should come to them, and that alone every 70 months, at the end of every 70 months. 2, that he to whom secret should be imparted should be above the age of 300 moons or months. 3, and that such things should be discovered to none in any place where people are, but only in a desert, and only in the presence of the kasiki. And so we keep that secret among ourselves, because that we promise, excuse me, but because that we promise ourselves great favor from them for the good offices which we have done to our brethren. It is not lawful for us to visit them. Excuse me. It is not lawful for us to visit them unless at the 70 months end, or if there happens anything new, and this is only fallen out but thrice in my time. First, when the Spaniards came into this land, Second, also when ships came into the southern sea. And thirdly, when you came, whom they long wished for and expected. That's interesting. And thirdly, when you came, whom they long wished for and expected. They did much rejoice for those 3 new things, because they said the prophecies were fulfilled. Montesinos also said that 3 other kasiki were sent to him by Franciscus to the port of Honda, yet not telling their names till he had said to them, you may speak to, until the Franciscus had said to them, you may speak to them freely. They are my fellows in my function of whom I have told you. And the 5th could not come for age, so he must be too old. But those 3 did heartily embrace him. And Montesinos, being asked of what nation he was, he answered them, a Hebrew, of the tribe of Levi, and that God was his God. Which when they had heard, they embraced him again and said, upon a time you shall see us, and shall not know us. We are all your brethren, by God's singular favor. And again, they both of them bidding farewell departed, every one saying, I go about my business. Therefore none but Franciscus being left, who saluting Montesinos as a brother, then bade him farewell, saying, I go to visit your brethren with other Hebrew kasiki. As for the country, be secure, for we rule all of the Indians. And after we have finished a business which we have with the wicked Spaniards, we will bring you out of your bondage, by God's help. Not doubting, but he who cannot lie will help us, according to his word. Endeavor you in the meanwhile that those men may come. Okay. So, just wow. Wow. Again, I will put that link in the description, and there is just so much in there. And it makes me wonder also, because these kasiki they're in the West Indies, and they just call themselves Indians, but it's apparent they're not of the Hebrews, because first of all, their forefathers tried to kill all of the Hebrews without success, and it ended up being destroyed. And then eventually it sounds like they came to the Hebrew faith, because they call themselves Hebrew kasikis. So, but yet they can't live with the Hebrews. They can't live with the tribe of Reuben or Manasseh or Ephraim, which they called Joseph. So are these Canaanites? Are they... They're different somehow, but we're not really told what they are. So that was very, very interesting. I hope you guys enjoyed that. All right, moving on. Regarding the language of the Native Americans, Dr. Elias Boudinot wrote that the Indian languages in general are very copious and expressive, considering the narrow sphere in which they move, meaning they don't get out and about much and they keep to themselves. Their ideas being few in comparison with civilized nations, they have neither cases nor declensions. They have few or no prepositions, and they remedy this by affixes and suffixes, and their words are invariable, the same in both numbers. All this, if the writer's information be correct, is very similar to the Hebrew language. He has been informed from good authority, and the same is confirmed by a writer well acquainted with the subject, that there is no language known in Europe, except the Hebrew, without prepositions, that is, in separate and express words. The Indians have all the other parts of speech except as above. And then he also says on a different page, he says, the famous Captain Cook, in his visit to the coast of America in the South Seas, says that the inhabitants met them singing in slow and then quicker time, accompanying their notes with beating time in concert with their paddles and regular motions of their hands and other expressive gestures. And at the end of each song, they remained silent and then began pronouncing ho-ho-ah forcibly as a chorus. The ship's crew listened with great admiration. The natives behaved well. It's a little bit condescending. Pastor Smith stated, Dr. Boudinot assured us that he himself attended an Indian religious dance. He says they danced one round and then a second, singing "Hall, Hall, Hall" till they finished that round. Then they gave us a third round, striking up the words "lay, lay, lay." On the next round, it was the words "lu, lu, lu," dancing with all of their might. During the fifth round was sung "ya, ya, ya." Then they all joined in a lively and joyful chorus and sung "Hallelujah," dwelling on each syllable with a very long breath in a most pleasing manner. Dr. Boudinot adds, there could be no deception in all of this. The writer was near to them, paid great attention, and everything was obvious to the senses. Their pronunciation was very guttural and sonorous, but distinct and clear. How could it be possible that the wild Native Americans in different parts of the continent should be found singing this phrase of praise to the great first cause, or to Yah, exclusively Hebrew, without having brought it down by tradition from ancient Israel? The positive testimonies of such men as Dr. Boudinot and James Adair are not to be dispensed with nor doubted. They testify what they have seen and heard, and I can conceive of no rational way to account for this Indian song but that they brought it down from ancient Israel, their ancestors. Meyer Kaserly of Christopher Columbus, that Christopher Columbus book, he says, of more interest than the mode of migration is the question whether any analogies in language, in traditions, in religious conceptions, or in religious ceremonies justify the acceptance of this ethnological theory. Roldan's chief argument in support of his view is the language of the Indians in Hispaniola, Cuba, Jamaica, and the adjoining islands. He contends that it has many resemblances to Hebrew. In fact, he even calls it corrupted Hebrew, which in my estimation, I think it probably more aligns with the Paleo-Hebrew, because a lot of the Hebrew that the people of this time were speaking was a mix of some Hebrew with Aramaic and, if I remember correctly, some Yiddish. So actually what they're calling corrupted Hebrew is probably more of the more ancient Paleo Hebrew. And he asserts that such names as Cuba and Haiti are Hebrew, and that they were first applied by the earliest caciques, which are the chiefs or leaders who discovered and peopled the islands. The names of the rivers and of persons in use among the natives are derived from the Hebrew. For example, Haina comes from the Hebrew Ain, meaning stream. Jonas from Yonah, Yake from Jacob, Urias from Urias, Sabeo from Seba, Maisi from Moisi. The names of their tools, of their little canoes, the name Axi for pepper, the name of the storehouse they use for maize and grain and the like, all point to the Hebrew language. Their rites and ceremonies, as well as their language, form one of the main arguments in favor of this theory of descent. Circumcision prevailed among the Indians. They often bathed in rivers and streams. They refrained from touching the dead and from tasting blood. They had definite fast days. Marriage with sisters-in-law was permitted if they were childless widows. Wives were discarded for new helpmates, so polygamy. They also they divorced their wives as well, but some of them were polygamous. They also sacrificed first fruits on high mountains and under shady trees. They had temples and carried a holy ark before them in time of war. They were also, like the 10 tribes, inclined to idol worship. All writers and travelers agree, moreover, that there were many Jewish types of face among the Indians, the Aborigines of America. Okay, so I am, just in the interest of time, I am not going to read every one of these words, but I do encourage you to take a screenshot so you can make it bigger, and then you can compare the Carib, Creek, Hawaiian against the Hebrew. Okay, but there's just a couple I'll pick out. So, for example, in English, we would say his wife. In Carib, that's Liani. And in Hawaiian, that's Wahine. And in Hebrew, that's Lihani. And then for the heavens, in Carib, it's Shamim. And in Hebrew, or it's Kemim. And then in Hebrew, it's Shemim. And then the Jehovah, in Carib, it's Yokana. In Creek, the Creek language, it's Yehoah. And then in the Hawaiian, it's Lehovah. And then in Hebrew, Jehovah. And then I'll just do one more. And then the word for father in the Creek language is Abba. And Hawaiian is Akua. And then in Hebrew is Abra. So I think you'll find that very interesting. But I just need to get us moving on here. Now to the physical attributes of the Native Americans. In regards to the Native Americans all being related throughout North, Central, and South America, Pastor Ethan Smith relates the following examples. He says, this information regarding a renowned gentleman by the name of Baron Humboldt, who was a celebrated author from Germany, and a most celebrated character. His works were published in New York, so I believe we probably already read this one. But relative to our natives having one origin, our author says the Indians of New Spain bear a general resemblance to those who inhabit Canada, Florida, Peru, and Brazil. They have the same swarthy and copper color. So the word swarthy, if you look that up in the Old English Dictionary, it means brown or reddish brown. It's denotes a dark color. And then you guys know what copper color is. Flat and smooth hair, small beards, long eyes with the corner directed upward to the almond eye shape, and prominent cheekbones. This American race occupies the greatest space on the globe. Over 1.5 million square leagues from the Terra del Fuego Islands to the River St. Lawrence and Bering Straits, we are struck at the first glance with a general resemblance in the features of the inhabitants. We think that we perceive they all descended from the same stock, from the same people. Timothy Jenkins, author of the 10 Tribes of Israel, stated, but to proceed, the color of the Indian, generally speaking, was red, brown, or copper-colored, differing according to climate, high and low grounds. They are universally attached to their color and take every means in their power to increase it, preferring it to the white. They give a name to the white people, which is highly contemptuous. It is that of a heterogeneous animal. Sometimes when they aim at greater severity, they will call them the accursed people. The hotter or colder the country of where the Indians have long resided, the greater proportion have they of white or red color. And probably, I would say not white, but probably a lighter color. This is asserted by James Adair, who lived among the Indians for 40 years, from his personal experience. He has compared the Shawano Indians with the Chickasaw and found them to be much fairer in coloring than the Chickasaw, though their endeavors to cultivate the copper color were the same. He thinks the Indian color to be the effect of the climate, art, and manner of living. Their tradition says that in the country far west from which they came, all the people were of one color. In the south, the Indians are tall, erect, and robust. Their limbs are well shaped so as generally to form a perfect human figure. They are remarkably vain and suppose themselves to be the first people on earth. The 5 nations call themselves Ongwe Honwe, which is men surpassing all others, the only beloved people of the Great Spirit, and also his peculiar people. Du Prat says in his History of Louisiana, the nations of North America derive their origin from the same country, since they all have the same manners and usages, and the same manner of speaking and thinking. It is ascertained that no objection arises against this from the different shades of complexion found among different tribes of Indians. According to all accounts given of the Indians, there are certain things in which all agree. This appears in the journals of a Mr. Giddings of his exploring tour. The most distant and barbarous Indians agree in a variety of things with all the other tribes. For thousands of miles, the North American Indians have been abundant in this. Dr. Williams, in his History of Vermont, says, in whatever manner this part of the earth was peopled, the Indians appear to have been the most ancient, or the original men of America. They had spread over the whole continent, from the 50th degree of north latitude to the southern extremity of Cape Horn, and these men everywhere appeared to be the same race or kind of people. In every part of the continent, the Indians are marked with a similarity of color, features, and every circumstance of external appearance. Pedro de Sica de Leon, one of the conquerors of Peru, and who had traveled through many provinces of America, said of these Indians, the people, men and women, although there is such a multitude of tribes or nations and such diversities of climate, appear nevertheless like the children of one father and mother. And I'm going to just add my opinion here, but considering that the Israelites, while is still one nation in Israel, completely drove out the Canaanites and displaced them, as we read on those inscription stones, I think that there are parts of the Americas, like the West Indies, for example, and maybe some in like the Mayans of Mexico, and probably some places in South America where I think some of those Canaanites went. So, and here's why. Because in Ohio, for example, where you've got the Ohio mounds, and we've got various mounds placed about, I've seen enough interviews with the Native Americans, and they will tell the people, those were here when we got here. So now some of the signs and things will claim that they're from the various Native American tribes, but I think that's to hide the fact that it's, we don't want to talk about giants. The Smithsonian went to great lengths to take all of the giant bones that were found by the people who were homesteading in North America, for example. As the Homestead Act passed and Europeans were moving in, and they were given anywhere from 80 to 160 acres of land on the condition that they had 5 years to build a house, grow crops, and make improvements. And so as they were plowing and digging through their land, many all across the United States found giant skeletons. And when the Smithsonian was called, they disappeared. And so this is something that, they're still, it's out there now, and so many people who really want to look into it. It's there. We still have newspaper accounts describing them, even if we don't have the skeletons to see. So just all that to say is you have just so many Native Americans saying these mounds were already here when we got here. And the one in Ohio is in the shape of a serpent. It's in the shape of a snake. And that leans more to the serpent cult, which I think are Canaanites. But there could be other giants as well. We don't know, but pretty definitely sure they're not Hebrew Israelites. And then you have certain tribes like the Paiute in Nevada that tell stories of being harassed, that when they came here, they were being harassed by giant, red-headed Indians that were kidnapping their people and eating them. And the only way that they could finally deal with them was to wait. They figured out where they slept at night, and it was in a cave. And then they waited until all of the red-headed giants had gone into the cave for the night. And then they put a bunch of brush and twigs and logs, and they set fire to it. And anyone that ran out of the cave, they shot with arrows. And then a lot of those red-headed giants in the cave just died of, smoke inhalation as asphyxiation. So there's enough stories that signify that some other people were here when they came that they had to deal with. Okay, so we're kind of getting to the end of this presentation. I just want to show you some pictures of what our Hebrew Israelite looked like, and the various Native American tribes as well as the Indigenous people. And we already heard last week, we know that the Indigenous Hawaiians, before the different Asian people were invited over by King Kalakaua much later to come in and to work help do the sugar plantations, right? But before that, before other people started coming in, and before the Europeans started coming in, the missionaries and such, they were a dark people, okay? And they, many of them observed Mosaic laws and circumcised. So anyway, here is an example. This is King Kamehameha, and he united all of the Hawaiian Islands under his rule. And I think it's very clear that he is a very big black man. And he was a force to contend with. He managed, so each of the Hawaiian Islands of Maui, Lanai, Molokai, Oahu, and the Big Island, they all had their own chiefs. And he went to war to unite all of them. And there were a couple of the islands that, to avoid bloodshed, just said, we'll give you our allegiance. We don't kill our people. So he managed to do that. But so then you've got the Hawaiian people, you've got the Indigenous people of Australia. These are the last monarchs of Hawaii before it was usurped and stolen by the U.S. government, and the Americans that were kindly allowed to live in Hawaii. This gentleman is King Kalakaua. He was monarch of Hawaii, and his was, they call it a bayonet constitution, because he basically, so you had the missionaries who went over there, well-meaning, and then they had children, and a lot of those children grew up, and they're the ones that started the plantations. The sugar was big business, and they wanted the land, and they wanted to control things, and they wanted to control the monarchy. And the some of these monarchs were more, they're like, we don't mind you being here. They gave them places in, their various cabinets and stuff as advisors. And it was like, you may live here, you're welcome to live here, but they still very much were looking out for their own people, which did not always please the plantation people. And they literally held a bayonet to him and basically said, you will sign this Constitution. And so it basically, for the first time, made the monarchy in name only. And so these sugar plantation Americans, they were born in Hawaii, but their parents were missionaries from America and different things. And so they felt they had the right to take over. And then King Kalakaua actually died while on a trip, and his sister, Queen Liliuokalani, was the last reigning monarch of Hawaii. And their palace on Oahu, it's called Iolani Palace, and they literally imprisoned her in there and basically said, if you don't resign, we are going to slaughter your people. And she loved her people so much. And she was also an amazing musician. She wrote so many songs. The Hawaiian song Aloha E, she wrote that. But she loved her people so much, and so she didn't want anyone harmed. So she literally resigned and abdicated her position under threat. And then she kept appealing to the U.S. government for help, and she appealed to the British government for help. But the British government didn't want to get involved, and the U.S. government wanted to annex Hawaii because all those sugar exports were big business. Yep, that's what happened there. So I hope you're beginning to see by now that our government is greedy, and they feel that they can just go into any place and take. And these are the elites. These are the controllers. All right, moving on. To the left, this is the ancient Arawak Taino people in what was known as Hispaniola. Today it's comprises Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic. And these were Chief Joseph Riverwind's ancestors, and these are the ones that unfortunately were the first ones that encountered Christopher Columbus. And they also had the misfortune of the subsequent Spanish conquistadors coming in and almost completely annihilating them. And then to the right we have a Yuchi, or a Koyaha warrior. So now the Arawak Taino are a little bit lighter skinned, but you can see that the Yuchi warrior is quite dark. And then here are a picture I took of the modern day Taino peoples of the Caribbean. Okay, and here we have the indigenous Chichimeca, which, remember, are the Chickasaw of North America. So the two are one and the same. And then to the right, we have a modern Chichimeca man of Mexico. Okay, on the left, this is a chief from Senegal. Obviously, they look like black men, black persons. And then to the right, this was from June 26, 1579. This is Sir Francis Drake being crowned by California natives. You can see they're also a dark people, a black people. And then here we have the Mohican chief of North America, and also a Blackfoot tribal member. And there's a reason they were called the Blackfoot. They were a dark tribe, a black tribe as well. This is a picture of Indians hunting in the Bay of San Francisco, California, circa 1822, or maybe a little bit before that. No, I think it was before then. Anyway, these are San Francisco Bay Native Americans. And then lastly, this is a picture of New Netherlanders. So the New Netherland would be, this is another thing that's been kind of hidden. We had a Dutch presence. What we call New York now used to be New Amsterdam and New Holland. And the Dutch had quite a presence on the East Coast. And the English went to war with them. And of course now all of those are New York, New Jersey, all, named after England places. But this tribe is from Cape Cod. Looks like Cape Cod, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, and Connecticut, with small outposts in Pennsylvania and Rhode Island. And they're called the New Netherlanders tribe. All right, that's all I have for you today. This is the end of part 5. Thank you so much for taking your time to spend with me. I really am enjoying the comments and just how much you guys are enjoying the information I'm sharing. And I hope that this presentation didn't disappoint. And next week, the Most High willing, next week, but the next presentation will be our final presentation. It will be part 6. And as promised, we're going to dig into some of these DNA studies to back up everything that I have presented to you here. So I look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great week. Stay safe and be well. Take care. Bye.